Tell us about yourself, your background, and what led to the creation of Ecotone Renewables.
Sounds good. And thank you for having me on, Pedro. It's great to see you again. So my name's Dylan, CEO and co-founder here at Ecotone. To give you a little bit more context on myself, I was actually born in Jerusalem, grew up in Connecticut, and moved to Pittsburgh about 7 years ago to go to Carnegie Mellon. Got my bachelor's and master's degree in material science and engineering, so an engineer by training, and started this company while I was in school. So really spent those first 3, 4 years in like deep R&D, really building our first prototype, perfecting our products and services. And personally, I've just had a huge passion for sustainability, for waste to value solutions, and food in general, very much a foodie at heart.
I love it. And I know you're based out of the Pittsburgh area, and it's good to see the partial skyline of the Pittsburgh area. Anything you want to say about this great background?
So you can actually see some of our soil sauce right here. That's what I'll point out. Um, but we have partnerships all over the city so far with our biodigesters. We can get more into what those are and who we work with.
So let's begin with an update on your fundraising journey. Like all startup founders, you and your co-founder Kyle spend lots of time and effort pitching your company to potential investors. How much have you raised to date, and what have you learned about fundraising in the startup world?
Yeah, great question. So to answer directly, we've raised 1.5 million in pre-seed funding to date. We're about to close a $3 million price seed round that's led by Earth Foundry. Um, and I will say it is a long process and journey. I think my advice to other early stage founders and companies is to really focus more on relationship building rather than the funding amount. So I think especially as like early technology companies, especially hardware companies, where it's even more difficult typically to fundraise because there's a lot less investors that are familiar with those spaces. It is really about like putting yourself out there, setting up meetings in person, virtual, and just starting to build those relationships and connections with potential partners, investors, advisors. I think the feedback that I usually hear, or the advice I get, is to ask for advice, and sometimes you end up with investments instead. So I have seen that happen before as well. So I think that is kind of my piece of advice is to kind of focus on the relationship building, but also to look at the many different forms of funding that are out there. So we've tried pretty much everything under the sun at this point. We've done like crowd-funded loans through Honeycomb Credit. We've done an Indiegogo campaign for our soil sauce products. We've done debt facilities, equity fundraising. Right now, really what we've been focusing on is equipment financing to make us a lot more of a capital efficient company. Um, so I think that's to say is like look at all of your options and make sure that as you're going into these different funding opportunities, you kind of know exactly what you're getting into. For us, VC funding very much is a great match for the growth trajectory that we've had and are planning to do. But for some other companies, that might not be a great fit. So I think that's the advice I would give is also to look at and explore some of those other opportunities.
The business of Ecotone Renewables is a clear value add to food waste recycling and to agricultural productivity. But can you share on a simple level the science behind your process of removing food waste impurities and the conversion to the soil fertilizer?
Definitely. So, yeah, at a very high level here at Ecotone, we turn food waste into organic liquid fertilizer and renewable energy. And we're using a product or a process called anaerobic digestion. If you're not familiar with it, the name might sound scary, but it's a process we are all familiar with. It's exactly how our stomachs work, animal stomachs. You're using microbes, bacteria, and fungi to break down food waste without oxygen. So it is a form of biomimicry. So again, that means basically imitating natural processes on a larger, efficient industrial scale. And something we've seen in the food waste stream, and as anyone that's checked a compost bin that's open to the public knows, contamination is a huge problem across the industry. So what we've learned is doesn't matter how great of a job my marketing team does on branding and signage, doesn't matter how much like training and signage you provide, there's always going to be some level of contamination in a food waste stream. So that's really a lot of the IP and problem solving that our engineering team has been developing. So there's a few different avenues that we've been exploring. One was first actually a robotic arm system paired with a machine learning algorithm. So that was detecting and removing impurities actually using a physical robotic arm. And we saw that that system was maxing out at about 70% effectiveness. As you can imagine, there's layers of food waste, so you need to get under them. More recently, we've switched to a press, which you can kind of think as like a giant hydraulic garlic press. So all of the mushy food waste materials go through the sieve, all of the hard plastic, glass, metal, rubber gets left behind. Um, so there's a few different technologies out in the field. There's also density separation I've seen, but that can lead to a lot of microplastic solutions. So you basically like grind everything up and then separate things by density. So that's really a lot of what we've been doing is trying to separate before it gets ground up to avoid. We're seeing a lot of contamination in the news around PFAS, microplastics. So making sure that we're part of the solution and not the problem.
Are there any other areas of sustainability that impacts agriculture that you're excited about that shows some scalability either for B2B or B2C?
Definitely. There are endless amounts of innovative startup companies out there. I think specifically in a space around agriculture that I'm excited about is regenerative agriculture, which is really being pioneered by the farmers themselves. And so, really, what we're seeing is a lot more focus on long-term soil health rather than immediate yields by kind of draining resources from the soil, which we've seen for decades in commercial agriculture across the US. So I think this is a space. Kiss the Ground is a great example of a documentary around that. There's a few others that I know of as well, but really exciting space that a lot of farmers here in Pennsylvania, across the US, are leading in really trying to improve our soil health, our soil resilience. And in turn, that does then improve our crop yields, the nutritional value of our food products. So I think it's exciting to see all of the innovation, all of the work led by our farmers in that space. But I think also one of the big pain points that we've seen and heard from farmers is that transition time. So it typically takes sometimes up to like 3 to 5 years to transition a traditional farm over to regenerative practices. So that's planting multiple intercropping species, that's using different natural ways of pest control. Like ducks are great examples to like get rid of snails and other critters. So there's multiple different ways to solve a lot of these problems and be more regenerative, but it takes a lot of time. So to answer, I think I missed the second part of your first question around the organic fertilizer, and that's really what that product is made to do.
Yeah.
So that is a microbe-dense liquid fertilizer that farmers are using to help speed up that transition process over to regenerative practices. So instead of it taking 3 to 5 years, it'll take 1 to 2. And again, really focusing on that long-term soil health and the nutrient value that we're getting from the food.
Besides funding, right? What are the expansion priorities for your company in the next couple of years? And how are the challenges of growing your company challenging your own growth as a business leader?
Yeah, definitely. So to answer the first question around like who are these next partners that we're working with, um, I would say it is a combination of big corporate enterprise partners. So that is actually processing their food waste for them, partnering to try to help them be zero food waste facilities and offices. We're also working very closely with multiple universities. We just deployed system number 6 to Bryant University out in Rhode Island. University of Pittsburgh is getting its first 2 biodigesters at the end of May. So that's been exciting to see as well on the university side, is it's a great opportunity, again, for them to reduce food waste on campus, but also to engage students, engage researchers, provide some employment and training opportunities in the clean energy space. So on kind of the customer side, I think that's really some of the exciting partners that we're already working with, some new ones we're starting to set up partnerships with as well. I think the big challenge is this is all me figuring it out for the first time. So I think being able to call that out as it is like, this is my first time scaling a company, building one from scratch. And first of all, accepting that fact and then being able to ask for help, I think has been a real game changer for us, myself and my two co-founders, Kyle and Elliot. And I think what we've seen has been very helpful is really surrounding ourselves with seasoned advisors that make up for the lack of gray hairs and wrinkles that we have. We're starting to get a few. But I think that has been extremely helpful to avoid a lot of the common pitfalls that business owners, especially in this earlier growth stage, are trying to figure out and avoid. So I think surrounding ourselves with like very seasoned advisors that have been scaling companies, sales operations, engineering design, all across the board has been extremely helpful.
There seems to be a real sort of universal mission that everyone can get around this, right? As you are creating something that's going to benefit society, it's going to benefit all of us. So I think that in of itself is a great motivator, I would imagine.
Exactly, yeah. And I think what's been interesting internal to the company, external with partners and investors, is we've actually set Ecotone up as what's called a public benefit corporation. So for tax purposes, it's very similar to standard C Corp, what you see most big Fortune 500 companies as, but it holds us as executives, as a board of directors, liable to a triple bottom line of revenue, positive social impact, and positive environmental impact. So I think that's been a really helpful tool. It embodies a lot of who we are and what we do as a company, but it also aligns a lot of our stakeholders across the board. That includes our investors, our customers, our colleagues. So I think that having a corporate structure that kind of embodies a lot of those values has also been extremely helpful.
Well, thank you, Dylan. This has been very informative and a really good start to a dialogue that will continue with additional questions that our audience can read on the Talent MBA website.